people on average live between 6 and 18 months.
And that mindset is so crippling.
I started mustering up resources in the cancer world to figure out how to prevent and treat cancer with natural medicine.
Welcome to The Incurables. I'm Don Wildman. Sue Ellen Crano had always been identified by her toughness and her direct approach, just like her father. She had never been afraid to do the difficult work it took to get things done the right way. In fact, she was rarely afraid of anything. During a routine doctor visit, Sue Ellen was told that something was wrong. Her initial response was typical of a New Yorker. Tell me what I have to do to fix it. Unfortunately, her doctors couldn't even tell her what the problem was. The only thing they knew for sure was that her condition wasn't getting any better. In fact, whatever was going on inside Sue Ellen, it was getting worse.
The prognosis was not good.
Everything became like, this is the last pizza. This is the last time we'll go see the movies.
It wasn't something that we, I think, sat around and really thought about for hours a day, which we could have, and I think would have been destructive.
My kind of bent in the whole thing was, if you're determined, you will beat this.
I could roll over and take what was coming to me or muster up all my internal fortitude, and I decided that that was the way I was going. I was not going to die. I was not going to let this beat me, and I'm still not going to let it beat me.
It sounds so silly, you know, but it's true. The power of positive thinking goes a huge, huge distance.
A native New Yorker, Sue Ellen grew up in Brooklyn. Her parents were well established within the borough, especially her father, who was a prominent local political figure.
My dad was a politician in New York City. He was the leader of the Democratic Party of Brooklyn and was also a building contractor.
Sue Ellen idolized her father. She would often shadow him at construction sites and hang out in his office. She was only 8 years old when her father died of a heart attack.
I was just really attached, and I spent a lot of time after his death in his office pretending I was involved in business and politics.
Pretending turned into reality in Sue Ellen's adult life. She became politically active and was fiercely competitive in sports.
I remained active politically and still remained physically active until my illness.
Sue Ellen is probably one of the, I put her in my top 5 most competitive people I've ever met.
She's so tenacious.
Sue Ellen was not one to allow things to linger either. So it was with routine diligence that she went to the doctor to see why her ear was giving her trouble.
He looked at me and he said, "Something's not right."
As a precautionary measure, her doctor performed a pelvic exam. What he found confirmed that something was amiss.
I tried not to get excited, but since every person in my family has had cancer, that was the first thing that came to my mind.
Sue Ellen's doctor recommended that she go in for a pelvic ultrasound. The specialist found nothing out of the ordinary, but Sue Ellen still felt that something just wasn't right.
And for 2 or 3 years, most people who tried to follow up on that thought the doctor was crazy.
My son was acting in a show up in Mammoth, California, and I just happened to feel a breast lump one day. I went to the local gynecologist to get referred for a mammogram because I didn't want to let a minute go by without getting that checked. I asked them while I was there if he would do a pelvic. And he did a pelvic, and he was like, "Something just doesn't seem right." And so they sent me for a pelvic ultrasound. The only thing they discovered on the ultrasound was a small cyst on one of my ovaries.
Having been cleared by yet another ultrasound, Sue Ellen returned to her busy life. A year later, she went in for her annual checkup. Sue Ellen's primary doctor once again expressed concern.
The doctor said, "I want you to have a tumor marker test for female cancers called a CA-125.
CA-125 is a protein that many cancer specialists utilize as a tumor marker or biomarker and can be measured with a simple blood draw. CA stands for cancer antigen and is said to be present in greater concentration in ovarian cells infected with cancer than those that are healthy.
The results came back at 42, and 35 is considered high normal. And so again, I was sent for more tests, and the tests came back basically normal, with just a minor cyst, but this time on the other ovary.
Polycystic ovaries are relatively easy to treat, but being understandably cautious, Sue Ellen called her friend, Dr. David Alberts, who is the director of the Arizona Cancer Center.
Dave said, I wouldn't worry, but why don't you go see a colleague of mine at USC who's one of the nation's experts in gynecological cancers and see what he says.
So Sue Ellen went to Los Angeles to see Dr. Morrow, who ordered yet another CA-125 test, as well as various CT scans to get a read on her situation.
The CA-125 was a little more elevated, and the scan again showed almost nothing, just some cysts on my ovaries.
Dr. Morrow recommended that Sue Ellen return for tests every 6 months. With each subsequent visit, the CA-125 readings escalated, yet the CT scans repeatedly showed no overt signs of any major trouble.
January of 2001, my CA-125 was close to 100, and the CT scan showed that I had some fluid, some ascites, in my pelvic cavity.
Again, this discovery did not immediately alarm the doctors. Sue Ellen was scheduled for surgery to simply drain the fluid and expected to quickly get back to normal.
We expected nothing. I mean, she wasn't sick. She hadn't acted any more than her usual self throughout all of this. There was no obvious physical problem.
So I went to sleep, and I woke up in the recovery room. I asked the nurse there what had happened, and she said, they just took out your right ovary. And I remember going, yes. I was so excited because that meant there was nothing major. All of a sudden, the door of the recovery room bursts open, and I see my son, and I see his face. And I just looked at him, and I said, I have cancer, don't I? And he just burst into tears.
Sue Ellen Crano had spent several years dealing with ovarian abnormalities that, despite dozens of tests, none of her doctors could seem to diagnose. Finally, a routine procedure to remove fluid from her pelvic cavity revealed the answer that no one wanted to hear.
In the midst of what we thought was going to be maybe a 2-hour operation, the surgeon came out white as a ghost.
His look was shock. His look was fear.
I think I mostly processed it intellectually because the emotional response would have been impossible.
I remember very clearly sort of going down this hallway and just sort of vomiting all over myself in the bathroom, kind of collapsing.
We went from day to night in 2 minutes.
I was filled with tiny little seedlings of what appeared to be metastatic ovarian cancer.
Everybody was operating under the presumption that she was going to die pretty much any minute.
My whole life just changed at that moment. I had always thought that if I had lived till my son's 8th birthday, I would live forever, because my dad passed away right before my 8th birthday, and I was 44 years old and didn't think I would see 45.
So the intellectual response is, okay, what are we going to do next?
The plan that they had come up with was to do 6 rounds of chemotherapy, both intravenous and intraperitoneal.
And then they were going to do a follow-up 6 months later, surgery, have a look, see how things had progressed.
Sue Ellen decided to try the chemotherapy. She endured the first round right after her surgery.
She was very afraid of what the side effects were going to be and how they were going to affect her outlook, in the sense that she didn't want to be beaten up so badly by the chemo that she sort of lost her will to continue.
A couple days went by after the chemotherapy, and I started feeling achy and tired. But I said, you know, I'm just going to persevere, and this is not going to get in the way of my regular life. On my second visit to the day hospital, the doctor, Dr. Morrow, stopped by, and he looked at me and he said, "Did you ever work in asbestos?" And I said, "No. Why?" And he said, "Well, we think you have mesothelioma." And I said, "That doesn't sound good. What is it?"
Mesothelioma typically involves the lining of the lungs. Much more rarely is mesothelioma of the lining of the intraperitoneal space or the peritoneal lining. And it is a fibrous tumor, not a glandular tumor. And it tends to be associated with exposure to asbestos.
Mesothelioma-related cancers or asbestos-related cancers usually is decades after the person has been exposed to the asbestos.
Back in the 1950s and 60s, asbestos was introduced as a miracle construction compound and could be found in nearly all building materials. It was utilized consistently throughout the 1970s until the extreme health hazards associated with asbestos were made public.
My dad was a building contractor in New York in 1950s and 60s, and remembering the vinyl asbestos floor tile that my dad used in all his homes, and quickcrete concrete and joint compound and all of those great materials that were actually filled with asbestos that I, as a tomboy, played with in our backyard when I made my mud pies, and also when I wasn't being a tomboy, used the vinyl asbestos floor tiles as the floor of my Barbie doll house. And I thought, oh my God, this is bad, because as you read through the mesothelioma websites, the first thing they say is that mesothelioma is a fatal illness with no known cure and a life expectancy of 6 to 18 months. I was devastated.
The emotion of it was so intense and sort of nullified any kind of problems of the past.
Horrible thoughts went through my mind. I started mustering up resources of everyone I knew in the cancer world.
The attitude was always, let's throw the book at this thing.
I walked into the Claremont Library, and they had a section of new books that had come in, and out from this section popped a book called How to Prevent and Treat Cancer with Natural Medicine. And I picked it up and I said, I've got to get this. There's a reason I walked in here at this time and that book was there, and I'm going to take this seriously.
Had been dealt a lethal blow. It seems a childhood spent visiting her father's construction sites and frequent exposure to asbestos-laden building materials had resulted in cancer. Mesothelioma is fatal, and Sue Ellen didn't know where to turn until she stumbled upon a book about treating cancer naturally. She was willing to take a shot. Her life depended on it.
So I went home and I sat and read the book from cover to cover. It was written by naturopathic physicians. They detailed diet and exercise and herbal supplements and a whole way of living.
Sue Ellen devoured the book, some of which detailed an extensive regimen of mineral and vitamin supplements to help patients fight off tumors and to promote an overall healthy lifestyle. She was determined to employ every means possible to fight this disease.
She's a very, very informed patient. She knows oftentimes what's happening in the field before her own doctors do. She cites, she gets them all the relevant research so that she's on top of her own care, which I think is hugely important.
So then I started buying things that I'd never heard of before, like quercetin and wobenzyme, which is a cocktail of 8 essential enzymes that Germans swear by, and spirulina and grapeseed extract and maitake mushrooms. I started taking them multiple times in the day in the various quantities that were prescribed in the book. And I noticed that I had so much energy. My whole demeanor changed.
When she was better, we made an effort to, sort of slowly bring her back into physical activity. She does yoga, she walks all the time. It was those sorts of positive activities that she could sort of chart an improvement on that let her know that she wasn't dying.
It's interesting because so many people are so resistant to herbal supplements, and most of these things are naturally occurring in the food that we eat, but not in enough quantity to make a difference. And I just noticed this sense of well-being. And whether it was fighting the cancer or not, I put in my brain that there was a Pac-Man that was in these pills, and when I released these pills into my body, the Pac-Man just would come out and gobble up the cancer.
I suggested the use of particular types of juices to enhance her immune system. And anytime you introduce liquids into the system, it's going to always help your digestive system. I recommended the use of castor oil packs, and with her case in particular, it should enhance the immune function. Actually, I think your T cells and B cell count goes up. So those markers for an improved immune function actually show improvement with the use of castor oil packs.
Every time I'd run into Dr. Redding, he'd come up with something. Are you eating your almonds? 3 almonds a day. 3 almonds a day takes care of tumors. Now I see Dr. Redding as an osteopath who does manipulative medicine. And just yesterday, I was prescribed peanut oil massages. So he's been a big supporter of alternative therapies and keeping my mind open to things that I probably never would have experimented with.
Sue Ellen's grit and determination to overcome her disease was every bit as important to her progress as the naturopathic techniques.
It's a little bit like being in a foxhole. You have to have a combat mentality that you can win, that you can be okay.
Then Sue Ellen became aware of a new drug called Gleevec, which had shown promise in fighting cancer.
Being very attuned to medicine at this point, even more so than before, I looked at the article, and it was about a new type of drug that was developed to treat cancer.
Based on the early literature, and the drug had just been approved, I worked with Sue Ellen, I worked with her doctors, and I worked with the insurance company to get release of Gleevec, because Gleevec's an extraordinarily expensive drug. But it's a 21st century drug. So it hits only the cancer cells, and the cells go into what is called programmed cell death, and pretty much preserves normal tissue.
And I started taking them, and they had very few side effects.
Wouldn't you know, she blazed into remission.
I don't know if it's the Gleevec or the herbs and the minerals or my attitude or a combination of any or all of the above, but I'm still here, and most people aren't with my disease.
It had been a long road, but Sue Ellen's condition stabilized as her cancer went into remission, and she was feeling the best she had since this whole ordeal began. The CA-125 tumor markers, which had risen consistently for several years before her diagnosis, were now falling toward normal levels, meaning fewer and fewer cancerous cells in her body.
They were, at some points, as close to 4. Which is as close to 0 as you can get. As long as they're under 35, we're in the healthy range. Most of the time now they hover around 8, which is, I consider that great, although I am striving for 0.
Sue Ellen did continue with her oncologist's prescribed protocol of 6 rounds of chemotherapy. It was difficult, but she felt she needed to attack this disease by every means available. She also had another operation.
They took out my other ovary, my uterus, as much of my peritoneum. The cancer was on just about everything, but not in it, which was a good thing.
Anyone who has survived cancer will tell you that you're never really out of the woods. But Sue Ellen is doing well. While conventional medicine played a large role in her recovery, everyone close to Sue Ellen will attest that her dedication to alternative therapies was just as critical.
It'd be just unbearably presumptuous of us to think that only Western medicine is any good. There are plenty of other kinds of medicine that work perfectly well in other parts of the world that probably work well here too.
Everything she's doing is supporting her life. Her quality of life is definitely much higher than any of us anticipated.
I think I always knew that in order to succeed, you really had to take control, which wasn't difficult for me because I am a control freak.
That determination is why she's alive.
My mission in life is twofold. One is to live my life to the fullest and be a major integral part of my family and my friends and those around me, and to help them and guide them. But the other major mission is to be writing a book about cancer in a way that inspires people to say, if she can do it, I can do it.
We're all aware that for the past nearly 8 years, she's stolen her life back from this disease. And so our family life has been stolen back from this disease as well.
People with mesothelioma are not supposed to survive, but don't tell that to Sue Ellen Crano. Winners do not quit, and she was determined from the outset to do whatever it took, conventional or not, to beat this disease. She's alive today because of that determination.